Let's resume. I'm going to introduce our speaker to you. He did speak earlier today, but if you're visiting this evening, our next speaker is Dr. Danny Faulconer. He holds an MS in physics from Clemson University and an MA and PhD in astronomy from Indiana University, and he taught at the University of South Carolina for 26 years. He currently serves as editor of the Creation Research Society Quarterly. He's published over 100 papers in various journals, and now he works as a researcher, author, and speaker for Answers in Genesis. Dr. Faulkner.
Is the earth flat? No. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Book table is, no, I'm just trying to come back and elaborate.
The question.
You could tell us a wee bit more.
A wee bit more. Well, since you put it in Scott dialect, I guess I could oblige you. I'll say a wee bit more then. Well, you may wonder, okay, why are you so worried about this? By the way, let me back up a second. Many of you may have not heard about this, but there has been a flat earth movement that's been spreading around the world, all over the globe actually, the last 6-7 years. Boy, some people are kind of slow on that one. And I first picked up on this about a little over 5 years ago. What happened, I had a conversation over less than a week. 3 conversations, 3 different adults concerned about 3 different young people, and I thought, there's something going on. So I went on the internet, and I was amazed. So some of you may have not heard of it. You may think it's just a joke. I wish it were, but it has been spreading like wildfire across the social media, and it's YouTube videos and even conferences, believe it or not. And so it's made big inroads in the church. And that's my greatest concern for a number of reasons. And you may wonder, why you're so concerned about it. Well, the effect upon the church, I think I'm uniquely qualified with my knowledge of Scripture and of astronomy and physics to be able to handle this. But more than anything, for much of my life, I heard so many people say, well, belief in creation is like believing the earth is flat. And for many, many years, that was just kind of hyperbole. But now that there are people who really believe the earth is flat, that's not hyperbole anymore, and I want to make some distance between those people as much as possible, particularly when some of their arguments are lifted from us, recent creationists, and some of their arguments superficially sound like ours. So I need to make some distance there, and when I first started doing this, I was afraid my coworkers and stuff would think I'd gone nuts. But shortly after I became aware of this movement, our speakers started getting this question on the road, and we began getting inquiries. So I was able to get in fairly early on this. And you may say, well, didn't we settle this 5 centuries ago? After all, didn't Christopher Columbus prove that the earth is a globe? Well, actually, we settled this a little early, around 25 centuries ago. The first mention we have of anybody saying the earth was a globe was Pythagoras in the 6th century BC. You've heard of Pythagoras, Pythagorean theorem. We don't know his reasons. We don't have his writings. We only have what later people said about him. There's another man in the next century, Parmenides, who also talked about the earth being a globe. Again, his reasons are not really clearly given to us, but it's certainly being talked about 2,500 years ago, and they were highly regarded in their day and shortly thereafter. And I will grant that the flat earthers bring up a good epistemological study. And for some of you who don't know what epistemology is, I think most of you here do, but I'll give you a dictionary definition. It's a study or a theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. Or in other words, my own words, I would say it's how we know what we know. And that is a very important thing. And I think by being here at this Worldview conference, most of you are probably plugged into epistemology more than the average person would be. And that was something that I was much concerned about in my teaching at the university. I wasn't so concerned that they believe what I taught them, but I wanted them to know why. For instance, I actually used the globe Earth, going back 40 years of my teaching. and it's a good study there. I'd ask my students, how many of you, what shape do you think the Earth is? And all of them would say it's a globe. I guess it's good I left the classroom, because today if I asked that, I'd probably get mixed results. But I used to always get globe for everybody. And then I'd ask them, I have a room of 25 students, and I'd ask them, okay, give me evidence or give me an argument why the Earth is a globe. And usually not one of them, not one, could offer me a good argument. You see, the flat earthers say we're not being taught, we're being kind of brainwashed. We're being told, believe this, believe this, believe this, without even being convinced of it. And they're right. Very few people have been convinced that the Earth is a globe. They've been taught that the Earth is a globe, but they've not been explained why. And to me, it was much more important to get across this information. So I made a big deal about that, even 30 and 40 years ago in my teaching. Now, once I recognized that flat earthers raise a very good epistemological question, they proceed to drive it off a cliff at that point. They don't handle it very well. They erase the issue, but then they don't answer that problem very well. And this gets back to our education system. Much of our education system is geared towards memorizing dates and facts and figures, but the average college student really can't assimilate those and come to some reasonable conclusions. I tested differently to my students. I didn't give them multiple choice, fill in the blank, and on all those kind of questions. I would give them blue books. Anybody used blue books before? I'd hand out blue books, and then I'd have them a single sheet of paper with 10 questions on it. Like, use a diagram, explain how the phases of the moon occur. That's not the kind of thing you can really memorize. I expect them to explain things to me. And many of my students had really choked. They'd gone through 12, 13 years of education, and they had never taken a test like that. Imagine going to your boss, and your boss comes to you and he asks you a question about what's at work there, and he would not give you multiple choice answers. Usually if your boss asks you a question, he doesn't know the answer. He wants the answer from you. He's not going to hand you the answers and have you pick it out. Multiple choice tests are some of the silliest things on the planet, really. All right, I digress. Now, how do people in the past know the Earth is a globe? I like to go with the oldies but goodies. Aristotle, writing in 350 BC, he gave 4 reasons why the Earth is a globe. One was kind of bogus but fun, and the other one was not so good, but 2 of them were golden, and I like those. One of them is the shape of the Earth's shadow during a lunar eclipse. I showed this photograph this morning. I took this a few years ago during a total lunar eclipse, and I took a photograph before totality. This is a partial phase, taken probably half an hour out from totality. And you can see it's a full moon, but there's a chunk of it taken out. Can you see the shape, the shadow that's been taken out? And I can help you a little later. There's later in the eclipse, sized up pretty well for you. And the people, of course, who were there this morning, they already know the answer. And I think most of you that weren't here, you can still see it. But if you're really slow, I can help you out. And I can show you that circle right there. Now, at this eclipse, I was watching it in northern Kentucky. It was at midnight, and the moon was high overhead. Now, could the Earth be round and flat and cast a circular shadow? And the answer would be yes. If the Earth were round and flat like this, then the light shining up from below would cast a circular shadow on the moon. But I had a friend of mine who was at in Hawaii at the time, and when he did, he saw the same eclipse that happened at sunset for him. And so if he's sitting on a round, flat Earth like this at sunset, is it going to be a circular shadow? No, a round, flat disk does not cast a circular shadow when the light's coming in edge on. There's only one shape that will always cast a circular shadow regardless of the orientation, and that is a sphere, a ball, a globe. And Aristotle came up with that a long time ago. Not only that, he realized that as you travel north and south, the altitude of stars in the sky change. And I will show this photograph here of the Ark encounter. It was taken. If you've been to the Ark, you recognize where this was taken. One of the fellows who does astrophotography for me, he's a pastor. He comes to the pastor's conference every year. He and I went out to Ark encounter. I got special permission since I worked there. We spent half a night there. It took people several hours to find the circuit breakers to turn off the lights for us. So we had all these lights turned off, and this is a half-hour exposure that he took. And that star right above the bow fin on the Ark is Polaris, the North Star, and you can see the stars spinning around it. I did a similar photo this morning that I took in Arizona. This is a cool photo, too. And I mentioned this morning that the angle at that point called the North Celestial Pole, where the North Star is located to, is equal to your latitude. for me in northern Kentucky, it's about 39 degrees. I said this morning I went up to Edinburgh a couple of years ago, and where I am, it's a little less than halfway up. But when I was in Edinburgh, it was nearly 2/3 of the way up. A few months later, after being in Edinburgh, I went to South Florida to visit my sister, and the North Star there wasn't even a quarter of the way up. And that can only happen if you're moving on an arc like this. And incidentally, in the northern part of the other part of the sky, the southern part of the sky, as you go farther north, you're losing stars. They're falling below the horizon. As you go farther south, you gain those stars. Here in Tennessee, and where I lived for many years in South Carolina, in the winter, briefly at night, you can see a second brightest star in the sky called Canopus. It barely gets above the horizon. Where I live in northern Kentucky, I never see it because I'm too far north. If I go to South Florida, it's noticeably higher in the sky. If I go to South America, go to South Africa, it's high up in the sky like this. Again, it's because you're moving on a curve on the earth. And Aristotle knew about this. People traveled back then, and they knew better than that. I'll illustrate this. This is a circle representing the earth. There's a rotation axis. There's the equator. Everybody with me so far? Now, let's suppose I'm located at some latitude at the northern hemisphere. The angle between that line I've drawn to my location and the equator is equal to your latitude, isn't it? Everybody understand that? So if I go farther north, it's going to go higher. Go farther south, it's going to be a little lower. Now, I can draw in a tangent plane there. I'm going to indicate that by a dotted circle there. That tangent plane represents your horizon. If I'm standing at that end of that line on the surface of the earth, I can see everything to the upper right of that plane, and I can see nothing to the lower left of it. It blocks out half of the total celestial sphere out there. And so I get this impression of like a dome sitting over top of me like that. It's an impression, but it really is not a dome. Now, if I make a line parallel to that rotation axis of the earth at my location, then as the earth spins, the dome will seem to spin around that point in the sky. So remember those pictures I showed you, the stars spinning around, that's the point it's going to spin about. And again, the angle that it makes right there is going to be equal to my latitude. It's a nice geometry proof to go through that. I won't take the time to do that, but it's an interesting little exercise if you really groove out on geometry. It just comes right out. Now I'm going to just go ahead and say what would happen if you went to a higher latitude. It would be something like that, wouldn't it? That's like Edinburgh. Here's Kentucky. Edinburgh, Kentucky. Edinburgh, Kentucky. Edinburgh, Kentucky. Y'all see that? And what's going on is the stars up in the north are getting higher in the sky as I go to Edinburgh, but I'm losing stars in the south. And as I go south, I gain them in the south but lose them in the north. Everybody see what's going on? And again, this works very well. Every 69 miles you move on the earth, the altitude of Polaris changes by 1 degree. And that fits very nicely with a globe being 4,000 miles in radius. All right. Now, you want more proof? This is actually attributed to Pliny the Elder in the 1st century A.D. He noticed that the hulls of ships disappear first. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I happened to be in Virginia Beach on November of that year, and I went to the beach and I took some photographs. Here we have a container vessel, as you can see. They got the bridge castle in the back there, superstructure, the white. You can see the container stacked up about 7 above the deck. And you can see NYK line. The NYK line is a major Japanese shipping firm, one of the largest in the world. If you have seen any of their ships, you will know that those letters are above the waterline. There's a reason for that. For one thing, you don't want the paint below the waterline, but it's above the waterline. The fact that it's partly obscured is because I got there after the thing had sailed out several miles, and it's the curvature of the earth that's in the way, according to what Pliny the Elder said. Look at this photograph taken sometime later. The ship's farther out because it's getting smaller, and you can see the hull has completely disappeared, hasn't it? And then later on, it turned and started heading, I think it cleared the Chesapeake Bay and was probably heading to Europe. I'm seeing the stern. I can see that white superstructure. And then later on, all I could see was the top of the superstructure. I'm getting a little bit of inferior mirage showing up. Not only is the hull gone, but the containers are all gone. Unfortunately, I was getting up late in the afternoon, and the light levels were falling fast, and I couldn't keep with it. It would have disappeared over the horizon had I had enough time of daylight, but daylight was getting close to sunset at that point. I also did this when I was down in South Florida at the end of April, and I went out to Hollywood Beach, and I took photographs of several ships. This is one of them. It's another container ship. I got 4 in a row I want to show you. As it gets closer, it gets larger, and it turns. Right now, you can see something off the bow, something off the midsection, and something off the stern of the ship. And look what happens in the succession of photographs. As it got closer to me, it got larger. All these reproduced at the same scale, and you can see that you saw progressively more of it. So I showed you a ship sailing away. You see less and less of it. As it comes towards me, I see more and more, exactly what you would expect to see if the Earth is a globe. Clearly, the Earth is not flat. I'll show you these 4 photographs reproduced together instead of just in a little video almost. And you can see the comparison. It gets larger as it gets closer. It does turn. And again, I see more and more of. This is only over about 40 minutes of coming in. It's heading into a port there in South Florida. All right, Eratosthenes. Y'all heard of him before? Amazing result. When I would go over this with my students, when I got done, I'd ask them if they really understood what was going on. I'd ask them if they were impressed. If they were not impressed, then they didn't get it. All right? Eratosthenes built on this information. A lot of people get this wrong. Think Eratosthenes proved the Earth as a globe. No, he didn't. He took that information and he was able to measure the size of the Earth pretty accurately. He was not the only person to do this in the ancient world, but he's one of the best known. And what he did is he looked at the great library in Alexandria, and he traveled down to southern Egypt near a city called Syene. Today it's at modern-day Swan. And he knew the sun was directly overhead at noon on the June solstice because a deep well, if you stood on the edge of the deep well at local noon and looked down, you could see the bottom illuminated. You ever try looking down into a deep well? You can't see the bottom. If it's at nighttime, you shine a bright light down, maybe, but in the daytime you can't because the light comes in at an angle and the shadow hits the wall, lights up the side, and the bottom's not lit at all. Only if the sun is directly overhead, which doesn't happen except in the tropics. Syene was on the edge, northern edge of the tropics, what we call the Tropic of Cancer, which meant on the June solstice at noon, the sun's overhead for a moment or two. That never happened in Alexandria where he lived. So he goes back to Alexandria, and the Greeks were pretty good architects and builders, so he designed a gnomon. A gnomon is simply a vertical post like this. We don't know what it was made out of. We don't know how tall it was, but he did. He had it constructed, put it on level ground, and so at local noon the next year, he measured the shadow length. So he's got this vertical angle right there. It's a right triangle with a hypotenuse forming this side, one leg, the other leg right there. And that's what's diagrammed up there for you. And he measured the angle up here, the angle the sun is off from vertical, to be about 1/50th of a circle. That's 7.2 degrees, but 1/50th of a circle. Now, they knew trigonometry back then. The Egyptians were using trigonometry before that. So if you, anybody here study trig? All right. If you have a right triangle and you know the two legs, if you know the two sides, this side and this side, that's how you get this angle, don't you? All right, you know everything by knowing the two sides. That's how he measured the angle to be 1/50th of a circle. Now, he realized then that you can see the angle there, that dotted line, that vertical passes through the center of the Earth, as does the vertical at Swan. So the angle at the center of the Earth there must also be 1/50th of a circle. That arc length between those two locations, Alexandria and modern-day Swan. So if you know the distance between those two cities, all you have to do is multiply by 50 and you get the circumference, divide by 2 pi and you get the radius of the Earth. Did he know the distance between those two cities? Does anybody know what Eratosthenes is also known for? He's the father of geography. He coined the term. If you hate geography, now you know who to blame. And so he commissioned map surveying and map making, and so he knew the distance between, north-south distance between the two cities pretty well. He multiplied by 50, and voila, he gets the answer. 250,000 stadia. We don't know exactly which stadium he used. If he used the more common one, his answer was within about 20% of the correct answer. If he used the less common one, his answer was within 0.5% of the real value. Are you all impressed? If you're not impressed, you haven't been paying attention, as I said to my students. All right, that's an impressive result. First time I really got my head wrapped around it, I thought, that is so cool. 2,200 years ago, not only did people know the Earth's shape, but they knew its size as well. So this nonsense about Christopher Columbus, it's all mythology, all right? It's not true. There was other things going on. The mythology rose in the 19th century, and there's an evolutionary connection, which I don't have time to talk about tonight. So how did this flat Earth myth arise, that everybody thought the world was flat until a few hundred years ago? Well, I think there are three developments in the 19th century. Number one is the development of archaeology. Archaeology did not exist until the 19th century. The British basically invented it, and they went to Mesopotamia particularly, but also Egypt, and they began excavating all over the place. And in Mesopotamia, they discovered what they call, I'll put it in air quotes as well as quotes on the graph up there, the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. What they said was that the Earth was round and flat, and there was a dome over top. That was the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. Now, I put that in air quotes and quotes here because it was not the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. It was a ancient Near Eastern cosmology. There are many, many others. And in fact, I think they misunderstood that one. Anybody here been to a planetarium? What shape is the roof? It's a dome. Somebody coming along 1,000 years from now could look at that and say, aha, people in the 21st century thought there was a dome over top of the Earth. Yeah, they had a dome-shaped cosmology, but it wasn't because they thought there was an actual literal dome there. It may have been something else going on altogether. People are really funny that way. They want to pretend the ancients were really stupid when they really weren't. The second one is what's called the documentary hypothesis. Are you aware of what that is? It's a belief that Moses, if he existed at all, did not write the Pentateuch. Be very careful. I believe Moses was real and he wrote the Pentateuch. But they argue that the Pentateuch was actually written about 1,000 years later by a group of scribes, either during the Babylonian captivity or shortly thereafter. And so they picked up all sorts of things, the creation myth, the flood myth, the cosmology, all that was picked up. And so in the late 19th century, they began to read the Genesis account in terms of what they thought was the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. Now, if you're aware of the documentary hypothesis at all, you're aware that this is a direct assault upon the inspiration and authority of Scripture. And this idea actually has been discredited some bit, as has the supposed cosmology of the ancient Near East. But unfortunately, there are some scholars in recent years who've picked up on this, and as if it was something new. They picked up on it about a century after it was passé. One of them was Paul Seeley. More recently, it's been Michael Heiser out there. Anybody know the name Michael Heiser? A lot of his, they put little diagrams like this. They say this is a cosmology of the Bible. It's a flat disk with a dome over top like this. And they say this is the cosmology of the Bible. This is the cosmology the Bible teaches. Now, Michael Heiser doesn't believe that's the true cosmology. He's a heliocentrist. He believes the earth is a globe, but he thinks the Bible teaches this cosmology. And he also believes in the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture. If you can get your head wrapped around that, I'd worry about you. All right? I consider this man to be dangerous, and his ideas are dangerous because they've infected a lot of people. All right, and then the conflict thesis came along. This was the idea that religion and Christianity particularly and science and progress were at loggerheads all this time. You put all these together, and you've got a potent sort of brew here, which again be swept through liberal circles in the late 1800s. It finally made it to quasi-conservative circles only in the last decade, a couple of decades. And it's the latest rage now. The Logos software now has incorporated Heiser's cosmology, as this is the cosmology of the Bible, which is completely wrong about that and has very dangerous consequences of this. By the way, Washington Irving, I like him. He's a good writer, but in 1828, he was part of this movement too, a little early on. He wrote a big 2 or 3 volume compendium, The History and Life of Voyages of Christopher Columbus. What people don't realize is that he combined a lot of myth with that, and people at the time thought they were reading history. He made up a lot of the stories about the ignorant people arguing the earth was flat. He made that up. The historical record is quite different. Belief that the earth is a globe goes back earlier than that. This is a depiction from a Bible that belonged to King John the Good of France. This Bible was made around 1350. The reason why we know it was around 1350 is because I think it was in September of 1356. The English defeated King John in a battle of Poitiers, and this was part of the war booty that they captured. And the English have had continual possession of this Bible ever since. They've never given it back to the French. And this is a day 2 depiction. You see Jesus as the creator that we know from the New Testament, and you see the earth there surrounded by water above the firmament or expanse, or I like to say rocky. I'll talk more about that tomorrow afternoon. And I ask you, what shape is the earth inside of that? Is it flat?
It's a sphere.
Looks like a globe to me. So this notion that the earth is flat, it wasn't believed 1350, 150 years before Columbus. You can find depictions of a globe earth going back through medieval sources and back to ancient sources. You have to look for them, but they're there. Okay, how this whole modern flat earth movement came about was a man named Samuel Rowbottom. He was an Englishman, lived in the 19th century, and he'd conducted what's called the Bedford Level experiment. The Bedford Level is a drainage canal river on the east side of England. It's near the coast, and it's very, very flat. It's been straightened, so it's 6 miles straight there. So what he did back in the 1840s or so, 1850s, he got into the water on one end of the 6 mile straight, and he placed over point A on the right there a telescope. He got his waders on out there and set up a telescope tripod, so the telescope was only 8 inches above the water. Now that's significant, because if the Earth is a globe, 4,000 miles in radius, then if you're 8 inches above the water and you look off towards the horizon, flat surface of the water, your vision will be tangent to the Earth at 1 mile. So he got a guy in a boat, a rowboat there, with like a flag on it, about 5 or 6 feet high, and he asked this guy to row to the other end. So he rows as far out as a mile. When he gets to a mile, he's starting to get to that tangent, and if he goes any farther, if the Earth is a globe, then the bottom of the boat ought to start to disappear. By the time he goes the additional 5 miles, that's a total of 6 miles away from his location, then the Earth's curvature ought to be like 24 feet, so anything lower than 24 feet should not be visible. And he reported, you can see the tangent line there, way off of his head. He reported that he could see the boat and its flag the entire way. So he said, the Earth must not be a globe. It must be flat in order to happen. Now, what happened here is atmospheric refraction came in to play a role, and this is kind of complicated. I won't go into full detail, but what is an atmospheric inversion, temperature inversion? Well, you know that at the surface, the air temperature is usually the warmest, and as you ascend, what happens to the temperature? It gets less and less and less and less, doesn't it? That's basic grade school science. But if you have a cool body of water sitting there, and the air temperature is warmer than the water temperature, then the water is going to absorb heat from the layer of air in contact with it, and it's going to chill it. So you're going to end up with a layer of air that's colder than the air above it. See, it's inverted. Usually the temperature drops with elevation. No, it's going to increase when you reach a certain point. Above that, it will decrease. Now, this is a very stable situation because you know warm air will rise, expand and rise. It's buoyant, but cold air tends to sink. So this tends to sit there and produce a very steady situation. Now, the speed of light depends upon the temperature of the water. For colder, temperature of the air, the colder the air is, the slower the light travels. And so as the light starts moving on a tangent like this, it'll start to rise up. If the Earth is curved, it'll start to rise up out of that cooler air into the warmer air. But the problem is that's going to go from a medium where the speed of light is slower to a medium where the speed of light is faster. And if you've ever studied optics, you know that causes refraction, and the light is going to bend over the edge of the Earth, and it can go for miles like that. It's very basic physics. Unfortunately, flat earthers don't know physics. So it's blunt, but it's true. So what happens is there is the light beam taking off from the boat, and if there's no temperature inversion, it will do exactly what you see there. But if it's a temperature inversion, it will bend down and actually will travel around the edge of the Earth. Now, a modern-day example that the flat earthers like to use is this picture right here and a few others like this. This is Joshua Nowicki, a very accomplished photographer. He's taking a picture here of the Chicago skyline. If you look off to the left, that's the Willis Tower, formerly known as the Sears Tower. You can see the John Hancock Building and the Standard Oil Building, a few others over there. And what's remarkable about this photo is you can see there he took it from Grand Mere State Park, which is more than 50 miles across Lake Michigan in southwestern Michigan. And if you do the calculation, you'll find that the amount of curvature between you and Chicago ought to be almost 2,000 feet. Nothing in Chicago is that tall. So how, they say, can you see Chicago skyline? Well, atmospheric refraction if there's a temperature inversion. And by the way, on a warm summer or spring day, temperature inversions are pretty common over Lake Michigan, because in the southern end of Lake Michigan, the temperature of the lake water hits about 70 degrees in July or August. That's the max temperature. And you often will get warm spring and summer days warmer than the water temperature. One well-known flat earther today, Rob Skiba, went out and did an experiment, I think in May or early June a few years ago. The problem is it looked like a warm day. They were wearing short sleeves, and I know the water temperature at that time of year is probably 60 degrees. So there was a temperature inversion and a half. And I need to point out that Joshua Nowicki is not a flat earther. He just simply is a good photographer, and he understands optics, and he knows what conditions will produce a photo like this. Would you agree a photo like this is provocative? It sure is. If you go out and you don't see anything, it's not very provocative is what you expect. This is not what you expect. So it's a cool photograph. Again, Joshua Nowicki knows better. He knows the Earth is not flat, but he knows he can get this provocative photo, which is, unfortunately, flat earthers miss that point. He's also put some of his photographs into time-lapse because the amount of refraction changes. And in some of those time-lapse he has, the skyline bobs up and down like this. It's amazing. That would be what you'd expect if the explanation we're giving you is true. The flat earthers have no explanation for that. Also, contrast that with my earlier photos. I gave you 2 examples, and I have others. I've done this. I don't live near a large body of water, so I can't do this experiment very often, but every time I've done it, I get results that are consistent with the Earth being a globe and not being flat. The fact that flat earthers seem to always get the opposite results tell me that maybe they're cherry-picking their results. You know what cherry-picking is? You pick the results you like, and you throw away the ones you don't like. Here's a good example of cherry-picking. This is, people have taken to calling this the Black Swan photo. This was actually taken about 4 years ago, but it was not really picked up until about a year and a half ago and really started being trumpeted. This guy sits at the beach in Southern California, and he takes his photograph. We've got two oil rig platforms out there. One's at 6.21 miles, one at 9.41 miles. And from a low altitude like this high above the surf, there should be appreciable curvature between you and the Earth, between these platforms. Notice that the horizon appears to be beyond them. And so he says, aha, the horizon, the geometrical horizon should be between us and them. It's obviously behind. If the Earth is a globe, it ought to be in front of them. But since the Earth is not a globe, this is what you expect on a flat Earth. Slam dunk, the Earth is flat. Notice something important. That leftmost one, particularly, to see how distorted it is? That little derrick crane-like thing is really wavy. Now, this is what you might expect if the Earth is a globe. Same place, same 2 oil platforms, but notice that the horizon is definitely in front. So which one's the right photo? The one on the right is consistent with the Earth being the globe. The one on the upper left, that supposedly is consistent with the Earth being flat. Both photographs were taken by the same person, a flat earther, by the way. He took the one on the lower right one day, and he took the other photograph, I believe, the one on the upper left, I believe, the next day. Now, I've watched the video very carefully where he produced this 4 years ago, and notice what he said about the one on the lower right, all right? This is what he said. Most days, normal visibility of platforms and boats will appear they are behind the horizon curvature of Earth. Most days. What did he say about the Black Swan photo? He says, once in a while, not very often, there will be days when conditions are right to see full image. He's just admitted he cherry-picked. He took a bunch of photos and he said, most of them prove the earth is a globe, but I'm going to go with the one photo that proves it's flat. And flat earthers run with this and act as if that is the norm everyday experience. Again, every time I've done this sort of experiment, I get evidence that the earth is a globe. They claim that they always get results that it's flat. I suspect there's a lot of chicanery going on here. A lot of lying going on here. A lot of cherry picking. They're not being honest. And if flat earthers tell you otherwise, what I'm telling you, they're lying to you. They're not giving you truthful information. Some of them are not intentional about it, but they're lying nevertheless. There's no other polite way I can say that, folks. It's beyond being wrong. They're actually teaching you false things, trying to convince you of something that's demonstrably not true. So Rowbottom does this experiment in the 19th century, and the movement was born. It grew very rapidly, gathered a lot of adherents there through Rowbottom's influence. He was quite a talker, apparently, quite a charlatan, I believe. I wonder if he was even serious about it. The movement waned considerably in the early 20th century. By the mid-century, hardly anybody was left. In 1957 or 56, a guy in England started up the Flat Earth Society. Bad timing. The very next year, Sputnik happened. And so for the next decade or 15 years, he was the go-to guy to laugh at him when asked about anything but doing with the space flights and so forth. There have been actually several Flat Earth Societies. And by the way, if you talk to a Flat Earther, don't bring up the Flat Earth Society because they all believe it's a shill organization. It's being run as a controlled opposition, actually. And the Flat Earth movement was revived in the early 21st century, mostly through social media and YouTube. So you got a bunch of YouTube-certified Flat Earth scientists out there applying their trade. Only they know how to do science, by the way. That's another story I don't have time to get into. I could go on for hours and hours, but I got to keep it short here. And within this movement, there's a broad range of theological beliefs. There are Hindu and Muslim. There are deists. There are New Agers, there are Baptists, there are other Christian denominations as well. I'm not terribly concerned about the others. I am concerned about the ones that do claim to be Christian people who take the Bible very seriously, believe it's authoritative, inspired, because that is the threat that I perceive. I spend a lot of my time directed at those people. Let me take a little time then going over some of the supposed biblical arguments for the earth being flat. I'm not going to be exhaustive about this, but I'll give you a few. They say, look at the rakia of day 2. I'm going to talk about that again tomorrow in my presentation. They say, the purpose there in day 2 was to separate waters above and waters below. And the luminaries were placed there on day 4. I'll go over again this in more detail tomorrow. And this is often translated as firmament. I'll go over why that's the case tomorrow as well. Now, today, that word rakia in the Hebrew is now translated expanse. If you look at more modern translations, not the older translations going back 400 and 500 years, it's now translated expanse. Anybody know why? It's a very simple reason. That's what the word expanse means. Simple as that. But the flat earthers have nothing of it. They insist that it has to be a firmament. They say that according to Genesis 1:2 and 14 to 18, the earth was made before the sun. I'm still trying to figure out how that proves the earth is flat. I honestly don't understand. And there have been people who put out like 200 plus verses or passages that prove the earth is flat, and I look at these and I'm scratching my head, and how do you get flat earth from that? You don't. You would think that if the Bible taught the earth is flat, you'd think somewhere in Scripture there'd be a verse that reads something like this: the earth is flat. But I've read the Bible and I've never encountered anything like that. If it's so clear and so plain and God wanted us to really know this, you'd think somewhere it would read the earth is flat, but nowhere does it do that. Instead, what they do is they take all these various passages here and there, ripping them out of context and reading a pretext into this. And it's a really horrible way to treat Scripture, I believe. So they choose to read certain verses this way and then turn around and interpret the Bible in terms of that. Now, one of the questions that comes up, they say, look, you recent creationists, you argue there at Answers in Genesis is that everything in the Bible is literally true. Everything in the Bible is literal. Well, I've gone over our website a number of times, and I've never actually found where we say that. A lot of people miss that point. There's a lot of non-literal stuff in the Bible. For instance, there are figures of speech. There are idioms. There are plenty of those. There are similes. Jesus told a lot of similes. He said the kingdom of heaven is like the parables he told. Those were similes. And a lot of metaphors. Jesus said, I am the door. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. I am the vine. You're the branches. Then he began talking about pruning the branches. Do you think his disciples that night thought that he was talking about literal branches and little trim? I don't think so. When he gave him his the bread and the wine, he said, "Drink. This is my body and my blood." Do you think they really thought, yes, this is literally his body and his blood? No, it was a metaphor. All right, and on it goes. And when you get into the poetic and prophetic books, that's where they really do a lot of quoting. But when you got to be very careful. There's a lot of symbolism and allegorical themes found in poetry and prophecy. Even the most ardent dispensationalist is going to agree with that at some point, right? So you got to be very careful about how you interpret these passages. And I do point out, though, that some of these things like the symbolic and allegorical themes are largely absent in the historical narrative. There still are some similes and idioms and so forth. I think some people are very frightened. They say, look, once you agree that there's symbolic language in the Bible, then where does it end? Well, I've already pointed out to you, you find a lot of that in the poetic and prophetic books. But you don't find that in historical narrative so much. In fact, you rarely find it at all. And it's really not difficult to tell the genres apart. Even in English translation, it's not that difficult to do. It's kind of lazy to assume you can't, and you shouldn't be deciding what the Scripture says based upon fear. It should be based upon truth, and you shouldn't be worried about being fearful about that, of misreading it somehow because it's not literal enough for you. Okay, they turned to Isaiah 40:22, and they said, "It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in." They say, aha, it says circle, not globe. This is a circle right there. That is not a globe. This is the two-dimensional sort of round thing. So, aha, the earth must be flat, and this is what it looks like. You've got the North Pole in the middle, and you've got the rim around here, and this is the Isaiah 40:22 flat earth we find in Scripture. They also point out, they say elsewhere in Isaiah, there's a word that Isaiah could have used for ball. It says, talking to Israel, "I will toss you like a ball over the fence," like this. Toss you like a ball. See, the word ball is used there. They said if Isaiah would have meant a three-dimensional round thing, a ball, he would have used that in Isaiah 40:22. But he says, used a Hebrew word, which means circle, two-dimensional, slam dunk, the earth must be flat. What they don't tell you is that elsewhere, that word used where it talks about the ball, it's used elsewhere in Isaiah, and it's talking about encompassing a city round about. When you siege a city, do you siege it spherically? No, you siege it in a circle, don't you? I mean, they didn't have Air Force back then, okay? So you siege it in a circle. So their own argument falls apart, but they don't talk about that other verse, do they? No, they're very selective, as I said. They're cherry-picking their passages. They cherry-pick everything when they do this. What about this? The earth having four corners. It's mentioned in Isaiah 11:12. It says, "He will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." And then Revelation 7:1 says, "After this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree." Aha! Where on a globe do you see, on a ball, do you see four corners? You don't. Therefore, slam dunk, the earth must be flat. I cannot believe they use that argument. I mean, I really don't. you get the sense you're not dealing with the sharpest tax in the drawer, right? Incredible. Well, there was a guy named Orlando Ferguson, 1890s, who decided to split the difference. Asked the question, is it round or is it square? Which one is it? He came up with this, and I call this the roulette wheel model because it's just kind of dimpled, looks like a roulette wheel, looks like a table there. And when I've asked flat earthers in internet discussion, social media discussion about this, I only belong to one group where I talk about this, and it's only because it's run by my non-flat earthers. I was invited to join the group a few years ago, and at first I declined. Then I realized, wait a minute, this is run by non-flat earthers? Okay, I'll come in. It's one of the few out there that's not. All the others are run by flat earthers. And whenever I ask them, they point these two verses out, and I say, well, how does that square with your flat Earth? And they always give me this picture. And I said, do you really believe this is what the Earth looks like? And then I usually don't get a response. So it's the funniest thing like that. They fold their tents pretty quickly. All right. By the way, I believe, I sometimes don't mention this, but people ask, well, what's it talking about in the book of Revelation there? Well, notice it talks about the four winds and the four angels. I think it's talking about it's an idiomatic description of the four directions. We even use that today. If you look at a detailed weather forecast, they will give you the temperature and the humidity and all that kind of stuff, and they will tell you the wind is out of like the southwest, or out of the west. Four directions, north, south, east, west. We still use that today. All right, what about the ends of the earth? It's used 28 times. Look at this, Psalm 67:7. God shall bless us, let all the ends of the earth fear him. Slam dunk. You can't have a ball, you can't have ends to a ball. You go round and around and around, you never reach the end. But if it's round and flat, there actually is an end right there. Slam dunk, the Bible teaches the earth is flat. Well, hold on a minute. Notice the parallel structure here. God shall bless us, and he says, let all the ends of the earth fear him. Can geography fear God? No. It must be talking about people. It's talking about people. And I think it's an idiomatic expression which refers to people at the remotest parts of the earth. Look about this one, another one. Isaiah 45:22. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. Again, can real estate be saved? And the answer is no. It's talking about people. This is a perfect example, again, of how flat earthers rip things out of context. They see this, ends of the earth, that's all they look at. I underlined it, 4 words, ends of the earth. And they say that describes our little model here, but they take the context out completely, and they don't understand how they've torn this up. And again and again and again and again, I see flat earthers doing that. Here's one, I love this one, tree of Daniel 4. It says, Daniel 4:11, it says, the tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to the heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Again, the globe doesn't have an end. And if the globe were there with a large tree growing up, at best, half of the globe could see it, the other half could not. But if the earth is flat, you glow a tree up, everybody can see it, right? Well, the chapter divisions in Daniel are pretty good. Chapter 4 is a unit of a complete account of something that happened. And the key thing I want to point out is this. In verse 10, it says, the visions of my head as I lay in my bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. It was a dream. And it's mentioned like 8 times it was a dream. Now, I don't know about you, but my dreams are pretty surreal. I'll tell you. I'll tell you about one dream I had. I was dreaming that I was in a larger than this auditorium, and suddenly this giant rhinoceros came crashing through the wall, came charging toward me. By the time it got to me, it was my mother. I'm not making this up. Well, at least not right now. In my dream I was. And then when she got to me, I recognized her mother. She turned into a dove and flew away. Are your dreams like that? My dreams are, I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking, that was so weird. I don't remember most of my dreams, but I remember on 2 different occasions, I actually was dreaming and all the rules were broken. And I suddenly stopped in my dream. I said, hold it. This cannot be happening. This is impossible. And then I realized it was a dream. I said, okay, go ahead then. We're fine. It happened to me twice. I mean, my dreams are very entertaining. I suppose yours are too. It's a dream, folks. Nothing in your dreams are real at all. But it was a dream of a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar. The tree it represented Nebuchadnezzar. There actually was a literal dream. There was a literal king. Daniel was literally called in to interpret the dream, and he literally told the king that this tree you dreamed about, which isn't real, by the way, represents you. So not only is it a not real tree in a dream, but the tree represents something else. This is getting more and more removed from literalness at all, isn't it? I mean, it literally happened in the account, but it's not a literal tree, folks. And the dream was fulfilled, literally happened. He lost his mind for 7 years and then was restored. Keep in mind this passage is not teaching cosmology, and it's not even clear if the cosmology of Nebuchadnezzar conformed to that. After all, I mean, if I dream tonight that the earth is flat, would that mean I'm a flat earther? Of course not. It just means I dream the earth is flat. Just because you dream something like this, it doesn't mean it reflects accurately what your cosmology. It just means you had a dream. That's all it means. Again, I can't believe they use that one, but they do. This is the flat earth model most commonly used. Getting people to nail down details is impossible, but I try again and again and again, but they won't be very specific. But you've got this flat disk sitting here. The North Pole is near the middle, and you've got a dome sitting over across, and the stars are placed in that dome. That's the firmament of day 2 creation. And the sun and the moon are either inside of that dome or just below it. And the whole thing spins around over the course of a day like this. All right, that's their model. And the North Pole is again in this middle. You can see Australia to the right and Africa to the left, and North America is way over on the other side there. That is there. This particular depiction was created by a flat earther. I did not create this. How do flat earthers explain day and night? Think about it. If the sun is sitting right here, then if the sun goes around and around like this, it never sets, does it? It's always above the horizon, so it should always be daytime. So they say, well, the sun is like a spotlight. It shines down like this. You got a cone that shines on part of the earth, and as it spins around, it alternately shines on parts of it, not on other parts. So they've done a little depiction. And by the way, both these depictions were created by flat earthers. I did not create these. I took what they produce, and that's their depiction. And of course, the sun never sets. It just appears to set. It just appears to set. Again, they want to take things very literally, but suddenly when it's not very convenient, they just have an appearance of sunset and sunrise. I don't get that at all, but they seem to be convinced it would work somehow. Okay, I tested this claim, and I won't go through the details. I'll just do this quickly. I don't have time. But what I reasoned was this. Look, if the sun's going around like this, then at local noon, if I'm right here, at local noon, the sun will be as close to me as possible. If I look at it early in the morning or late in the afternoon, it's farther away, isn't it? Everybody understand? Okay, if something's closer to you, it looks larger than if it's farther away, right? Does that make sense? That's called perspective. So wouldn't you expect throughout the day the sun would appear small and then get larger and then get smaller again? And indeed, I've seen many flat earthers produce videos like this. They put up a camera, do a time lapse or a video of some sort like this, and the sun looks really big up in the sky. As it gets down towards sunset, it gets really small and it sets. Oh, wow, it looks very convincing to many people. The problem is they keep taking the same exposure the whole time. You know, when the sun's high up in the sky, it's very bright. When it gets low in the sky, it's pretty faint. When it's high up in the sky, it's overexposed, grossly overexposed. I've taken a number of photos and stuff like this. What you're seeing is something that's like 30 times larger than the sun is, and when you get down close to sunset, you're seeing the true size of it. Yet this convinces a lot of flat earthers about this. So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to use the solar telescope, the telescope with the solar filter, the Questar, my handy-dandy telescope that I use. And what I did is I measured, this is now almost 5 years ago, and I observed it at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I did it that time of day because the sun was just barely above the trees at the end of the parking lot behind the Creation Museum, right by the observatory we have. I couldn't get it any earlier, and the sun was only 8 degrees above the horizon. And then I looked at it at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That was local noon, and at that point the sun was 63 degrees in the sky. Now, regardless of what the elevation of the sun is, they assume 3,000 miles sometimes. It doesn't make any difference. If you go through the algebra and the geometry, it scales out anyway. And it allows me to calculate how much farther away the sun is early in the morning, if this model is correct, to when it was over noon. And it turns out when it was 8 degrees in the sky, it would have been 6.4 times farther away from me. So it would have appeared 6.4 times larger at local noon. Everybody understand what's going on? What I've done is I quantified this sort of thing. I want to test it. And when I took the photographs, I did the same ISO setting, the same exposure time. Everything's the same. The only thing that's different is the time of day. And here's the first photograph I took. It's low in the sun. You can see there it's a big reddish-looking ball because, when the sun's low in the sky, it's fainter and redder. You can even see a little branch there around the 5 o'clock position. That's where it's just above the trees there. And so I took it, that's early in the morning, and I took it at local noon. And as you can see, it's 6.4 times larger, isn't it? Well, I printed both of them out, and I measured them very carefully, and to the ability to be able to measure it, they're the same size. Slam dunk. Flat Earth is wrong. All right? Every time I test it, I get up with a globe Earth, not a flat Earth, every time. Funniest thing in the world. They always get flat Earth, I always get globe Earth. Amazing. Other false claims. They say that the North Star, many of them say that the North Star is visible well into the southern hemisphere. I've made at least 10 trips to the southern hemisphere. I've been a student of the sky for 50 years. I go down there and I look for the North Star, and I've never seen it, but I don't know what I'm doing, right? Because I don't know anything. They know better than I do because they watch YouTube videos. And then they say that the circular pattern of the stars throughout the night can happen only on a flat Earth. I showed the videos before, and I showed the pictures. They go in big circles, don't they? They say as this thing spins around like this, it will look like that pattern. And only if the Earth is flat. If there's the globe, it would never happen. Well, hold on a minute. If you got a dome over top like this, and there's the point over top the North Pole where the sun, where the whole firmament spins around. Okay, you got this dome here, and it spins around. This axis passing through the North Pole of the Earth. The whole thing spins like this. So if I pick a star out there some point, and it's going to go in a circle like this, above it like that, right? Now, if I'm on the North Pole and looking up at it, it's going to look like a circle, isn't it? Anytime you look at a circle along its axis, it looks like a circle, doesn't it? But what happens if you get it off axis? What does it look like? It's an ellipse, isn't it? It doesn't look like a circle at all. I actually went in the planetarium there at the Answers in Genesis, and I did a little simulation of this. I had them spin the stars around the top of the dome. I set my camera up high up like this near the edge, and I took a photograph, and can you see the shape? It's following ellipses, isn't it? Following ellipses. Only at the North Pole would you see anything but ellipses. You'd see circles there, but only at the North Pole would you see circles. You don't see anything like this, do you? So the flat Earth model fails again. No matter what the flat earthers claim to the contrary, it's easy to demonstrate, if you understand geometry at all, that their model can't produce circular star patterns each day. And I showed you this morning. I'll skip past that real quick. It's just I'll go through it real quick. A little video of stars spinning around in a counterclockwise rotation above my house. A little time-lapse video I did. Here's another one I took in the southern hemisphere going the other direction. There are two distinct points in the sky around which the sky spins. That's what's clear. In the northern hemisphere, it goes around one spot. In the southern hemisphere, it's a different spot entirely. But if there's just a dome, everybody should see all the same stars, and it all should spin around the same one point and one point only. Again, that simple observation disproves their flat Earth model. Again and again and again, their model fails to predict and account for what we see. So if the Earth is really flat, and everyone's been lying to you, the schools and NASA and all these government agencies, and it's been going on for a very long time, there must be some vast conspiracy out there, right? That's the only way this would work. So who's behind the conspiracy? Who's behind it? Well, some people say it's the Freemasons. They've been the whipping boy of a lot of conspiracy. I remember 50 years ago having people talk about the Freemasons. And then also the Jesuits. That's another one that they like to go against. And the Jews, of course. They hate them as much. And there's a very virulent anti-Semitic movement among flat earthers. Very concerning to me. There's a guy named Edward Henry who's written 2 books on flat earth. His first book was called The Greatest Lie on Earth, Proof That Our World Is Not a Moving Globe. This man is a raving anti-Semite. I read his book. It's not pretty. Here's some quotes. Communism is essentially Talmudic Judaism. Do not think that Jews are ignorant of the fact that Satan is the god of their religion. This evil doctrine can also be seen in the Talmud, where incest, fornication, adultery, etc. are promoted as virtues and something to be desired. He misspelled that. The ritual sacrifice of Gentile children by Jews has led to repeated banishment of Jews from one nation after another throughout history. This goes on for 150 pages. It's difficult for sensible people to read. I wrote about this. I complained about it. In his second book, he took me on and called me out for certain things, mistakes I supposedly made. It was laughable, really, what he had to say. But most concerning, remember that discussion group I told you about? I went to this discussion group, and I gave a number of other quotes, including this one, a whole long list of quotes from this book, along this vein. And I asked the flat earthers there to condemn it. No one did. I asked again. No one did. I pleaded with them repeatedly, can you please condemn this? None of them could. One guy said, well, I'm sure there's some globe earthers out there with some strong anti-Semitic beliefs. I said, oh, fine. Give me an example and I'll condemn them so fast it'll make your head swim. He couldn't come up with a name. Well, you give me a hypothetical then. Give me something real. I finally concluded that if they could not condemn these horrible, vile statements, then they must agree with them. That's the only conclusion I can come to. And that's a nasty side that I'm just shocked. I really thought that this is a line they would not cross. They would stop there, but they didn't. They find it very difficult. Flat earthers find it very difficult to condemn the actions of any other flat earthers. It's amazing, and it's sad. If the earth is flat, then nothing can orbit the earth. We got a dome over top. How can you do that? The moon doesn't orbit the earth. There are no satellites. There are no astronauts. And we haven't been to the moon. I mean, that's what they explicitly state. And think about it. They're being consistent. And everything NASA's done has been lied about. They're all a bunch of Freemasons. They're all a bunch of liars. And I happen to know at least two Christians walked on the moon, the late Jim Irwin and Charlie Duke. I worked with Charlie's niece. I was good friends with his identical twin brother. My adopted hometown is Lancaster, South Carolina. Charlie Duke is born and raised in Lancaster. He was a big hero there. So a few years ago, I contacted Charlie and I asked him, can you give me a little testimony I can use? He said, sure. This is what he wrote. He said, I was the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 16 mission to the moon. We launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on April 16, 1972. We left Earth orbit for a 3-day trip to the moon about 3 hours later. As we maneuvered our spacecraft to dock with our lunar module, the Earth came into view about 20,000 miles away. It was an awesome sight. As you can see in the photo, the Earth is obviously a sphere and not a flat circle. As we journeyed to the moon, we could look out our windows to see the smaller Earth, and each time we could see different land masses, so it's obviously rotating on its axis. When I bring this quote up to flat earthers, they dismiss them as a lying Freemason, and they're done. Everything, they've got an answer, no matter how bad or how pejorative it may be. Everything must be interpreted this way in order to prop up belief that the Earth is flat. Jeffrey Williams, he wrote a book called The Work of His Hands. He spent more time photographing the Earth from the ISS than anybody, and he wrote this book full of pictures and some essays and such in it. This is one of his photographs. You can see the Earth clearly is a globe. In many of his photographs, you can see that, not all of them, because he's not looking at the edge, but it's clearly a globe. And we've had a speaker, Butch, his last name now, he's met him several times. He's spoken for AIG. He's a Christian man, and he's been in space several times. He's an astronaut. So we have several Christian astronauts today who can testify that they've been around the Earth, and orbiting the Earth, and it definitely is a globe. Well, what is the motivation of flat earthers? Why are they doing this? Well, I think some of them are well-intentioned. They're fooled, they're deluded, but they really mean well. There are many others I think are convinced are doing this as a prank. I have a hard time telling them apart. Do you know the term POE? P-O-E? Poe's law, you can't tell a pretender from the real thing sometimes if it's really well done. They're called Poes sometimes. I don't know. I have suspicions of who are the real people and who are not. I'm pretty certain about certain people out in the Flat Earth movement who are doing this just having a lot of fun and making some money while they're doing it, by the way. Some of them they're malicious. They're attempting to make Christians look foolish and discredit the Bible. That's been something that's been going on for a very long time. This is just the latest front on it. That is very damaging. And I really am concerned about Christians who've enlisted in this satanic conspiracy. They want to talk conspiracy? This is it. They're a part of it, though, and they accuse me of being part of the satanic conspiracy. Well, if you want to know more, I do have a book out there called Falling Flat, A Refutation of Flat Earth Claims. We do have them at the book table out there. I'll be happy to sign those as long as you get to them before I leave sometime tomorrow. But I talk about things I talked about this evening and much, much more. I also have about 20 or 30 articles or blogs on our website as well. I continue to add more information. The book was published a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I keep adding more information out there. I don't know if I'll ever write another book or not, but there's a lot of information I could process there. Fortunately, I think the Flat Earth movement has slowed down in growth, but it's still a problem, and we do need to be vigilant to battle this. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's just take a 5-minute break, and we'll probably finish early tonight. 5-minute break, and then we'll have our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please bring them to the front, but just stretch your legs, 5 minutes. So